Welcome to the teaching ministry of Lakeside Alliance Church. We are a movement of people who are passionate about pursuing Jesus Christ. If you're in Southeast Wisconsin, join us on a Sunday morning and consider partnering in a mission that matters. For now, sit back and open your heart as we hear from Pastor John.
There are some stories that are just best told through the eyes of the one who lived the experience. And Genesis 32 is most certainly one of those stories, and one where the biblical text supplies us with rich detail. And so I want you to try to imagine with me this particular moment by the fords of Jabbok, east of the Jordan River, roughly 2,000 years ago. And as you do, I want you to allow me to be your eyes and your ears as we step into the sandals of Jacob. Jacob, the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham, the next patriarch that God had elected to use to bring about his promise of redemption for the world through. It's a promise, though, that right about now is looking awfully shaky. And that's probably putting it mildly, right? I mean, Jacob, he has just finished a 20-year stint in a graduate level program of the School of Hard Knocks, provided courtesy of his father-in-law Laban. As Jacob, you've been right there. And I'll spare you the details, as it suffices to say that this is a school where you discover there's always somebody smarter. There's always somebody a little bit more clever. There's always a fox that can outfox you as a fox. And in a nutshell, this is your father-in-law Laban, to a T. He's more clever. He's been smart. He has been tricking you into one bad deal after another. And yet, God, in the midst of this horrible situation, hasn't abandoned you. As you've been far from your home, He hasn't abandoned you. And instead, after all of these years in this school, this family community, He has finally come to the point where He's actually going to help you escape. He helps you escape, and by the sheer grace of God, you're able to look back upon a place where you see God's gracious kindness, that He's brought good out of what it was a horrible situation again and again and again. And that's a lesson that you're about to learn again. Because unfortunately, at the present, your escape is one of the most classic scenarios of out of the frying pan and into the what? The fire. And in this case, that fire is one that's awfully hot. There was a reason for why you were at the School of Hard Knocks to begin with Laban, with Professor Laban. You've been put there because of what you put your older brother, your twin brother Esau, through. You put him through a similar ordeal. You had swindled him, you had cheated him, and eventually you had pushed him too far, and he came to the point where he was ready to kill you. So you had to run. You had to run, and God used this opportunity to spare you and to preserve you for those 20 years. And now that He's helped you escape, and He has now sent you and your whole household of servants and family and herds back home to the land of Canaan, back home to your kin. And so there, as you're traveling along the Jabbok River, you're wondering to yourself about exactly how long you think that your brother could hold on to a grudge. And what will he do when he finds out that you're back in the hometown? When you're back in the same area and you're no longer under Laban's protection or mom and dad's protection. But you figure to yourself as you think about this, surely it's been 20 years. I'm sure he's forgotten all about that little incident where I got him to trade his inheritance for a little bit of food to save his life. That's probably not even bothering him anymore. I'm sure it hasn't even crossed his mind for years that I was always mom's favorite. And I'm sure that he especially that he's not still upset about that time when I was able to steal the sacred blessing that my father had intended to give to him so that instead he got a curse. That's probably not even bothering him anymore, right? It's been 20 years. I'm sure he's forgotten all about it. As you mull that over, none of those concerns can change the fact that you're completely certain that God has sent you back to this land. He's even given you a miraculous sign with angels to confirm that, but you remain anything but certain that this obedience to God won't cost you your life. It's not going to get you killed. So you decide to send your brother some messengers to sort of test the waters, if you will, letting him know how well you're doing and how you're planning on returning home. And you've heard he's living in the hill country of Seir, and so you do the equivalent of dropping him a line and sending out these messengers. Now, given your past with him, you wisely decide that you'd better really wordsmith this thing. After all, you've heard that Esau is a very serious man that you should take very seriously. That he's the kind of man who makes people offers that they don't refuse. So you look at your servants and you say, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." The word favor here means grace, because let's not kid ourselves, Esau owes you nothing. Even the claim to family relations has its limits. And so what you need from him and what you're seeking from him is grace. It's grace. Well, after a couple of days, your messengers, they return. And they got some good news and bad news for you. Good news is they were able to find Esau, and they were able to deliver to him the message. Bad news is his sole response was to mount up with 400 men to come meet you personally. That sounds like a death sentence. What in the world besides war would you need 400 mounted men on horseback for? So as Jacob, you go into defensive planning mode. You know what's coming your way, and so you divide everything you have into two camps, figuring if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, then the other camp will escape, is left to escape. That's the kind of hard calculation that you make when you are cornered and you're desperate. That's not your only response. You do something else cornered people tend to do. You pray. And you pray this. You say, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." In essence, then, you're asking God for grace, based not on anything you've done, but on his promise alone. It's a good prayer. It is right, and it's true, and it is the one that God is going to use and work it out in your life, even if you don't display hardly any confidence that God is actually going to answer it with a yes. Because meanwhile, you're still trying to figure out this problem. I mean, as the old saying goes, where there's a will, there's a way. And since flattery didn't work, you move right along and you figure the next best thing is trying to pay Esau off. And so you gather up your herds and you send out to him a king's ransom of goats and sheep and donkeys and camels and cattle. And you divide it up into 5 different groups all along the river, and you send them out one at a time, so that by the end of it, this gift feels like it's gift upon gift. It's compounded with the kind of kindness that you're hoping Esau is receiving from you, and maybe will even show to you. You go so far as to specifically tailor the message with the herdsmen and what they're going to say to Esau when they get there. You probably even had them say it back to you just to make sure that they got it word perfect. And so with these messages and these extravagant gifts, you know 2 things. Number 1, you're trying to buy time. And number 2, you're trying to buy favor. As you quietly nurse the hope in your heart, saying, I may appease him with a present that goes ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. But with the sun going down, the light fading, your stomach is in knots. It's in knots. Any moment now, 400 riders might burst right into your camp and massacre everybody. The tension is eating at you. So you make one last move in the middle of the night with the light fading. You take your family and you move specifically them to the other side of the river. You're pretty sure Esau is coming from the south, and so you likely move them over to the north side of the river, and you plant yourself in between. Your hope is that Esau's probably after me. He's after me, and perhaps if he gets me, he'll leave the kids alone. So you kiss them goodbye. You send them off as you head back to your camp alone to wait out the night. Little did you know that God had a very different plan in mind for the night that you would spend beside the water. At that moment, your possessions are cornered. Your family is cornered. And now God comes that night to corner you personally. He sends an angel in the form of a man, not to fight, but to wrestle Jacob. Being physically built, being jacked as you are, you're wired, you're on edge, you're feeling like your life is on the line. And so as this guy comes to you and so forth, as you start wrestling and so forth, you think to yourself, I'm your huckleberry, and you dig in. And you give him everything you've got. For hours, this goes on. This match lasts all night long. And as the horizon is finally here and day is finally breaking, neither man has made any sort of progress. They've just continued to wrestle back and forth. And so the angel reaches out. And with the merest touch of his hand, your hip is thrown completely out of socket. Excruciating pain explodes throughout your body. You are in agony as it radiates from head to toe. And in humiliation as you realize you were never a match for him. And yet he let you hang in there, expending yourself all night long. You are now stuck, spent, and broken as never before. And the angel commands you to quit. It's daybreak. It's over. You're ruined. You're cornered and beaten. But you have one hope left. And that is the grace of God. The grace of God. And so you call out for it. You tell this representative of God, I will not let you go unless you bless me. I will not let you go unless you bless me. This isn't a claim from a position of power. This is a plea of desperation from a position of brokenness. It's a plea for God's acceptance, his approval, his favor, his grace, which is exactly what he gives as he gives you a new name, Israel, which means strives with God, or God strives. And so while you walk out of that camp walking with a limp, you limp with the hope of God's promise that you have ironically won through the sheer grace of God. God has already, in fact, though, changed Esau's heart. So that when you meet him a few hours later, he comes to you, runs to you, hugs you, kisses you, calls you brother. So that even while then he offers back to you all of the many gifts that you offered in appeasement to him, you tell him, keep it. Because God has dealt graciously with you. A truth you've personally learned. One you've come to throughout this whole ordeal as you finally have pursued the Lord with all of your heart, only to discover that in reality God has been pursuing you all along. And in the end, he gave you the grace you desperately needed when you came to the point of humble dependence on him and not on yourself. And that, Lakeside, is the key moment in the life of the patriarch Jacob. Jacob the trickster got tricked, the scammer got scammed, the planner who got cornered. Came to rest on the grace of God who first pursued him. This is for Jacob, this is a pinnacle moment in his life. This is the culmination of where everything has been headed, where despite his best gifts, his best tricks, and his best strengths, he remained entirely dependent upon the grace of God, which in the end is the only thing Jacob prevailed upon. God's grace received in his hour of desperation, where every other hope had faded, he was forced to lean solely on God's grace. And this is the same lesson that would then be at the heart of what God's generation-long wrestling match with the people that would bear Jacob's name of Israel would be characterized by. God would enduringly pursue and love and wrestle and call them into his arms to preserve them with a gracious kindness that they never deserved. He would even go so far as to go to the mattresses with them, to fight them, to bring about this blessing. That's the kind of striving, the kind of pursuing of a God who uses that pursuit to change us and bring about a pursuit in us of him. And the big story that God is telling, Jacob serves as just this beautiful example of God's unchanging character. Jacob's wrestling match here serves to show us his patient endurance as he loves his people enough to wrestle them to a point of dependence upon his grace alone. And that's the people of God that we have been grafted into, as the New Testament will tell us, as the New Testament will describe it. And that's why I want to point out to us this morning in 3 parts, so that we see what God is up to now and how we're to respond and then what those results will be. All while using lots of different little examples from this text to paint the picture with the rich detail that's been provided for us in this narrative. Because if our God hasn't changed, then our best attempts never decrease our total dependence on God's grace. Our best attempts never decrease our total dependence on God's grace. Every breath we take, every moment that we live of our extremely short lives are all dependent upon God patiently, kindly giving them to us. And so that there is never a moment in which God owes you or owes me absolutely anything. That in reality, when God looks at even our best attempts, that as Isaiah says it, he sees them as filthy rags. They don't impress a perfect God. And so then, not even when I'm at my best, when I'm taking risks to obey God's word, does that ever put him in the slightest amount of debt to me as if he owes me one. And yet, doesn't that seem to be a big chunk of our mentality? Doesn't it seem like most of the time when we are upset with God in our life is because something has not turned out the way we expected it would, or something in somebody else's life has not turned out the way that we thought it should because we thought we were owed one? We thought we had this coming and we got that. Or we thought they had this coming and they got that. In essence, our anger is saying, you got it wrong, God. I deserved X and I got Y. And so I've been wronged. When we're angry at God, that's what we're saying. And I don't care how many counselors told you that your anger was justified, because even our best attempts never decrease our total dependence on God's grace. It is always by his unmerited favor that we receive anything good. That's what grace is. Let me give you just a couple examples in the text of how it illustrates this. First, our need is never decreased by our success. Our need for grace is never decreased by our success. Like Jacob, we can try to lean on our success to give us security in life's challenges, even a reason for why things should work out for us. And you know, oftentimes success and wealth and whatever form that takes, they can tend to merit other people's favor. So we can very easily slip into thinking, well, it also merits God's favor. Or perhaps it shows how we've earned God's favor, or that we can do God a favor. But here's the deal. God needs nothing from you. He doesn't need anything from you. He could get whatever he wants, he could get from a rock. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need your best. He doesn't need it. He's God. He's completely self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything from you. Let that sink in for a second. Look at your bank account that way. Look at your time that way. God doesn't need anything from me. He's God. Let that sink in. If anything, instead, we should remember that while material success is sometimes part of God's favor, many times it has also served as nothing more than empowering someone's destruction and greater judgment in eternity. So if anything, our success points us in the exact opposite direction. The wealth that God has temporarily entrusted to us, the influence God has temporarily entrusted to us, likely puts us all the more into his debt, with an even greater responsibility for accomplishing what is good, while never decreasing our need for his grace. Second, it's not decreased also by our ingenuity. Not our ingenuity. Like Jacob, we can think that we can arrange for ourselves our lives through our little plans. Whether we cleverly devise our own little system, perhaps we come up with some kind of karma with religious good works to make God happy, right? Where we do something wrong, but we go to church to make up for it. We could take it on that end of the spectrum all the way down to the other end of the spectrum where we think to ourselves, listen, we're smarter than those church people. They need God to kind of fill in the gaps on their thinking and all that kind of stuff. So whether it's through some kind of finagling or smarts or scheming or something else, we can try to get around depending on God for everything, which works about as well as a 3-year-old trying to steal a cookie before dinner time. It's unimpressive and it's ineffective. We can't outthink our need for God's grace, ever. Third example, our physical gifts don't change our need. It's not in our physical prowess. Listen, there are a few years of life in which we may think to ourselves, as we look a little bit like Adonis or Aphrodite, that we really don't need anything else. And we're doing pretty good. The way we're eating, the way we're treating our bodies, how we're looking, that we're doing so good. We don't need God's grace the same as somebody else does, right? We can find a little bit of self-righteous pride. And then we can find ourselves reading something like 1 Corinthians chapter 1, where the Apostle Paul said, "For consider your calling, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many of you were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong." And we can even here find ourselves foolishly thinking, but I guess he called a couple of us, just a couple of us. But the strength of your body, your mind, and your spirit exist only by the grace of God. So then there is not now, nor will there ever be a time when we aren't fully dependent on God's grace. We may not be humble enough to recognize it, but we are always fully dependent on God's grace. Our success, our ingenuity, our physical giftedness cannot budge our total need even an inch. And if God mercifully corners us then into seeing our need for his grace, like he did with Jacob, then what should our response be? What should our response be? It should be coming to terms with the reality that God's grace corners us in humble dependence to desire his best. This is what it corners us into. That's what God is after. Do you realize that God uses then all kinds of means to place us into a position where our desires are shifted into desiring him? And this is exactly what he does with Jacob. Just look at the examples in the text of how he does it. First, God can corner us through our hard circumstances, through our difficult times. In the text, there's nowhere for Jacob to hide here. You know, he can't go back to Laban, and he can't go forward to Esau. He gets pressured to the point in his circumstances where eventually he's cut off from everyone. He's all alone. And don't forget, here, he's not even up to something bad. He's not even up to something bad in the text. But Jacob nonetheless has to learn the lesson that we all have to learn, that even our obedience is on God's terms and by his grace. And God corners Jacob through these very hard circumstances to teach him that. And if he did it for Jacob, don't you think that he may very well love you and me enough to corner us through our hardships too? Don't you think he might corner you on a sick bed, or in a courtroom, or in the principal's office, or on the side of the road, or some other hardship? I think so. And if God loves you enough to corner you and to give you then a desire for his best by humbling you, take that as the opportunity to ask for grace, to look for his grace. Second, God can corner us through our sin's consequences. The consequences for Jacob's past sin are catching up to him, and God is going to now use them. I remember a woman I met once at a previous church. She came in to meet with me. And as she began to unpack her story, it was just full of one line of long, sad, sinful choices after another. And so she was in some very difficult circumstances at the present. And eventually she made this statement that was somewhat of a comment, somewhat of a question, as she almost wondered, is God perhaps then punishing me for my past choices? Is God punishing me for my past choices? You know, of course, she probably could have been right about that. But that's not the whole picture. Consequences here and now for sin, they are oftentimes part of God's merciful plea for us to turn to him. The consequences for your sin that you've experienced, they can be just as well part of a merciful plea for you to turn to the Lord. Consequences for sin can be part and parcel to how God corners us into a humble dependence on his grace. Third, God can corner us through our brokenness. Jacob had a lifelong limp from this encounter, which meant that every step he took for the rest of his life reminded him of the night that he crossed paths with God's grace. He was reminded daily that the weight of his life depended on God's kindness. And he received that kindness through an incredibly painful encounter. Incredibly painful encounter. And church, as we look at these examples, I want you to look at your life. And I want to ask if you can see how your hard circumstances, your sin's consequences, even the brokenness that has been part of your life, that it has been part of God's merciful work of cornering you into a place of humble dependence so that you can desire his best, his grace. Have you made perhaps a humble choice to surrender to your absolute need for God's grace? If so, then I want to invite you to keep re-examining your life story, to re-look at your past, to retell your story through those lenses. It is a powerful thing to change the way that you look at the last 20, 30, or 50 years and to understand it through the lenses of the grace of God. And I know how important this is for several of you that have been through intense pain. And your need to be able to move away from bitterness over that pain, to begin seeing how God used even those things, how he brought good even out of the evil, and how he was using them, and how he has redeemed your pain in a loving pursuit of you. And if you've come to that place, if you've come to that point, then you can look at your limp differently. You can look at your lifelong place of brokenness and scars as a tool in making you holy. You can look at your past differently, as a place where God's grace pursued you and saved you. You can look at your sin differently, as something to be rejected and something to be repented over. And ultimately, you can look at God differently, as the one who loves you in spite of you, as the one who wrestles, who strives, who pursues you because he loves you more than you could ever even love yourself. That's what this pursuit tells you. And in that place of humble dependence on God, we can see how there's a final result. That God's grace changes our fundamental identity for the best. It changes us. This is a classic way, by the way, God works with men like Abraham and Jacob and Sarah and Mara and Peter and Paul, and yes, you and me. He changes their identity. And when you and I, despite our best efforts, are cornered by God into a humble dependence on his grace, where we want and we ask him by faith alone to bless us with forgiveness, with a relationship with him, where his presence is in our lives, that fundamentally changes who we are for the best and forever. And in this text and in so many others, you can see what that change entails. You can look at a couple examples here. First, it changes us by bringing us under his authority. Naming someone in the Bible was a demonstration of authority over them. And when God gives Jacob a new name here, Israel, it is a symbolic demonstration of Jacob coming under God's authority. And for the Christian, your life is now to be lived under Jesus. That's why you've been given his name now. Now you're a Christian. That's part of what it means. You want to apply then the Bible to your life because you want to obey. You want to come under the authority of what God has laid out for us in his word. But this fundamental change goes on. It makes us holy. It makes us holy. This is the second example. There's a curious editorial comment at the very end of this chapter. Last verse says this: therefore to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh, that is the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. This curious verse here, this is an opportunity to actually take note of an example of a principle that when God, in his grace, touches something, it becomes holy. That holy, as in set apart, belonging to him. This is a symbolic way of recognizing that. And by the way, this is what has happened to us. By grace, we've been set apart. We have been legally declared holy, as in belonging to the Lord. Which means when you stop and think about it, by the way, that you realize nothing else could be better for your life than having been touched by God, set apart, belonging to him. And I realize that sometimes when we look at that, we can think that that's being cut off from all the things that are fun and exciting in our life. We can fail to recognize that it's actually being forever connected to what is satisfying and freeing. I remember there was an elderly lady years ago I knew named Joni Flynn. And Joni told me a story about being at a Christian camp where she came to know the Lord. And it was that same day, though, that she was convinced that she was now going to have the most boring life ever. Joni was convinced that, God was true and that Jesus Christ had done on the cross what he said he had done and so forth. And so she repented and became a Christian, but did so with the full expectation that all the fun in life was at an end. What she didn't realize was it was just getting started. That the joy and the freedom and the adventure of her life was just getting underway. And like Jacob, you're going to find holiness isn't boring. It is life-altering, but it's far from boring. Third example, it changes us by giving us hope despite our pain. Verses 30 to 31 tell us this. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. The promise of Christ is not believe and everything, your health and your money and your relationships, etc., will get better. That's not the promise. No, in fact, coming to the Lord might be costly, it might be painful, you might walk with scars for the rest of your life from the moment when God cornered you. But you will walk in hope of the life to come. You will walk in a relationship with a God who promises, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." You will walk in a way that you will never be alone again. And the hope of those promises changes things. And you can endure all kinds of challenges when you have a hope that is sure, that is certain, and that is grounded on the grace of God. And we can see that over and again in Jacob's life, as God used him to demonstrate our need for his grace and to ultimately fulfill his promise of grace, of which we are beneficiaries of today. So that altogether we can say, our best attempts never decrease our dependence on God's grace, which corners us in humble dependence to desire his best, where we receive a fundamentally new identity. And as we turn, and as we pursue that grace, church, we'll find it's been God who's been pursuing us first all along.